Hey, what's up? It's Rashad. OG friend of the fam, Tony. Tony Baugh's back, man. And you know what brought him back? Sinners. He said, "Hey, I got something to say. I want to get up on. I want to get on the pod, expound about my take. I mean, shoot, and I think that's just indicative of the the reach that this movie has had. It's like this, just anecdotally. It's 2 weeks later, right? And my TL is still flooded with people talking about Sinners.
Mm.
And that rarely happens nowadays. Usually weekend something happens, everybody's excited about it, and then it dies down, and then the zeitgeist shifts to whatever the next thing is. Way
Mhm.
society is very, we microwave kids anyway, so we want something else quickly. But
Mhm.
this had definitely has had some staying power. So,
Mhm.
Tony, you have the floor.
Well, I appreciate it, man. Yeah, man, it's good to be on your pod, man. But I wanted to talk about uh my favorite scene in the movie, in Sinners, and
So
it's
you
a
did
great.
like the movie?
Oh, sure, man.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay. Just
I saw it in regular format, and I saw it in IMAX after that. And the IMAX is just, I mean, you saw it in IMAX, right?
I couldn't. I hadn't had the time.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm surprised about that. Rashad, you didn't see it in IMAX.
I know, like, I
Oh.
just did not have the time. Like, I might try to go see it, like, if it's still in theaters,
Yeah, they're putting it back in IMAX. They said in
yeah, next 15th to the
weeks. Yeah, yeah,
21st.
yeah,
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 so
yeah, yeah.
we got a couple theaters down here that'll have it. Like, I'll go see it. Of course, I am a flight away from 70 millimeter in New York, so I would go see that, but I don't have the time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's like it's a totally different experience. Like I saw it here in Edinburgh, and it was like I mean, it's great in regular format, but seeing it, how much you can fit on that widescreen, how much Coogler manages to put on that screen and frame, it's like it's something else, man. But yeah. So my favorite scene though in the film was the third act when Remick, when he uh, um, he approaches the juke joint, and our horrified protagonists are in there, and he approaches them, and he talks about how they need to assimilate. He doesn't use that term, but that's what he really wants to talk about. And I guess if I wanted to give a title to um, this little monologue here, it would be called "Of Sinners, Shedeur Sanders, and the Eschatology of Oneness." And that's what I really saw in that moment, which to me was the real horror in the film, was how Remick is really advocating for a wholesale, mindless assimilation. And what happens is, the scene when he comes to them and he says that y'all uh can't even fellowship by yourselves because you have this kind of dread and fear of being lynched as Black people in 1932 Jim Crow South. He
Yeah.
says, y'all can't even fellowship. He says, oh, come on and be a part of us. Be a vampire and join our vampiric order. Let us bite you, and then you're going to become like us. And then you'll have peace because we'll all be together. And I just think that that right there is really a kind of quali sign or a kind of indicator of a kind of uh, capitalist uh, capitalist desire, I should say, for having us to kind of become one, to become homogeneous. And it sounds, beautiful and I think salutary on the surface, but really underneath is a great horror with fangs, with a kind of undead spirit to it that is rapacious, that is hungry, that is bloodthirsty. And I'm reminded of a book that turns 20 next month called Black Rednecks and White Liberals by Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell was born in 1930. He's a Black economist and philosopher from North Carolina. He was born in Jim Crow South, um, but he was raised in Harlem, educated at Howard, then transferred to Harvard. And now, for the past few decades, he's been associated with Stanford, with the Hoover Institute, which is a right wing think tank. Thomas Sowell was for many years on the Heritage Foundation, the same Heritage Foundation that has produced the 920-page manifesto called Project 2025. Now, he didn't write that, but his thought helped shape that because he has been associated with them until well, up until 2016. He was associated with them. Um, and so we're talking about that kind of a guy, a neoconservative in the ilk of a Ben Shapiro, Candace Owens, Clarence Thomas. That's Thomas Sowell, but he is more intellectual than they are. And he wrote this text called Black Rednecks and White Liberals, which is his major work of cultural criticism, in which he is criticizing Black culture because he says, Rashad, this is his thesis. He says that a part of his major thrust is that in the 1700s, a group of Scottish and Irish folk, like in Sinners, Irish folk, uh, left Ulster County and they left Scotland, where I live now in Scotland, in Edinburgh. They left, they missed the Scottish Enlightenment. So they missed the economic reforms, they missed the education reforms, and they got here as a bunch of ignorant, backwater, backwood folk. And they were rootin' tootin', rough and tumble, and he said they like to fight. They would kill each other at the drop of a hat. And he says that what happens is they are introduced to the South. They immigrate over here and settle in the South. And guess who they come in contact with? African enslaved people
Of
who were
course.
enslaved for 246 years, from 1619 to 1865. And they meet these African people. And Soul says that what happens is by the time you get to the turn of the 20th century, at the end of the 19th century, turn of the 20th century, they start to lose this what he calls cracker culture or redneck culture. And he says that but the black folks are the one who retained it. He says that black people are the only culture in America today that have retained this ghetto culture, and he calls them black rednecks. And so he says that and what he does is he overemphasizes one segment of black culture and he allows it to stand in for all of black culture. And he says that black people thus are the reason for their own suffering because they are outside of the hedge of protection of white society. He says that he doesn't use the term theodicy, but that's what he's describing here. Is it kind of what I call an assimilationist theodicy? The book of Job.
Explain
Job chapter,
theodicy real quick.
yeah, here we go. So Job chapter 1, uh, Satan approaches God and says, the only reason that your favorite servant Job worships you is that you have a hedge of protection around him.
Right.
And that hedge is protecting him from all evil, from the presence of evil or ponerology. And he says that if you remove this hedge, he'll curse you to your face. I promise you. So Soul paints a theodicy. Theodicy is a kind of reckoning. How do we reckon with the idea that God who is holy and righteous? How do we vindicate that holy and righteous God who is holy and just and righteous, but allows bad things to happen to good people? That's what theodicy is, a traditional theodicy, a standard theodicy
Okay.
that tries to read the world as intelligible. That this God who is orderly, who is righteous and just, there's no way that he would allow bad things to happen. So we try to work through that. That's called theodicy. And what Soul does is his theodicy to explain suffering is that black people are outside of that Jobin hedge of protection. And the protection hedge for Soul is Western Civ. He says that Western Civ is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And if you just go inside, if you run in, you'll be saved. You won't experience what Leonard Harris calls undue sufferings. You might still suffer in life, but you won't have these undue sufferings like being lynched, for which Soul blames in his text. If you read, he has a section called "The Real History of Slavery," the real history, and it's the longest chapter in the book.
Of
And
course.
he says that, for example, he says that slavery caused racism, that racism didn't cause slavery. He says in the American context that instead of racism causing slavery, it was the other way around. He says that slavery caused racism because only in the American context, unlike the Portuguese, Brazilian context, or the British context, or the Spanish context, he says in the American context, when you had slavery, he says that they had this founding document called the Declaration of Independence, in which all men are created equal. And so he says they had to then start to come up with rationalizations and justifications to explain themselves to themselves, to justify enslaving human beings. because they had that founding document. And so he says that's where you get pseudosciences from, like drapetomania, like dysesthesia ethiopica, which was the belief that Black people couldn't feel pain and you can whip them all night long. That was called dysesthesia ethiopica. These kind of ethnologies emerged to kind of rationalize.
Like
uh,
phrenology.
Right, phrenology, craniometry, physiognomy, all these things became popularized in the American context. There was a guy who was American who studied here at the university where I'm getting my PhD called Benjamin Rush. He was one of the great uh, 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 pseudoscientists of his day. He thought he was a scientist, but today we call him a pseudoscientist. But he was one of the progenitors of ethnology. And again, how do we explain ourselves? We have to make sure we rationalize what we're doing. We have to rationalize Black people's inferiority, et cetera, right? And so he says that that's what created racism. It was slavery, the presence of slavery, uh, created racism. So I'm using this as an example. I want to show you how many mental contortions this guy does
Right.
to escape, to allow a kind of absconding of the horrors of Western civilization. He doesn't want he wants Western civilization to be up here. Like, he has a whole chapter about how we can't allow the Holocaust and what the Germans did during the Holocaust to mar the holistic history of the German people because they're great people. Because he can't even imagine a Holocaust happening or being enacted um, during 1930s and 1940s Germany. He can't because Germany for him is the peak of a kind of Western civ. So all
Right.
points of Western civilization have to be escaped. What I call racial escapism. He has to do it because again, his whole theodicy is that what Black people suffer because what they are not in the hedge protection of Western civ, of American culture, of white culture. And so it's what I call I have a paper on this actually. I call it assimilationist theodicy in which he wants you to assimilate. He says he has a whole section where he talks about how when the Black folks were freed in 1863, 1865, he said that the reason why the white people lynched them is that they were uneducated, uncultured, and during the Great Migration, which started in 1910, all right, when they left, there's a great line in the movie where he says that Chicago ain't nothing but Jim Crow with tall buildings, right?
Right.
Or Mississippi with tall buildings. The idea is that when these people leave and go to Chicago and New York and Boston, he says that they were lynched because they wouldn't assimilate. They were they didn't assimilate, and so white people resented them for that. He blames them for their own sufferings, Black people for their own sufferings. And so he says, "Come on in, be like us," like Remick says, right? And so for Soul, with his traditional assimilationist theodicy, um, uh, it's a kind of call for us to be like one, to be the same. And that's the only way that we'll have peace. That's the only way that all fears and all anguish will be inoculated in this mindless eschatology of a utopia, which I'm really calling the capitalist design as an economic system. And I'll get to that in a second, because what happens is, I mean, even if you read like Errol Miller, um, he talks about how Black men, for example, are unassimilable. He says that the Black men are seen as threats and you have to eliminate them. And so they have no ability to even be assimilated. And if you just use that as a kind of heuristic to understand soul, that means that what soul presents then is really a prayer. It's a really faith-filled eschatology where it uses theodicy, but it's as though it's a prayer. Because Black people, I think Errol Miller, he raised the possibility that we can't even assimilate even if we wanted to. Even if we wanted to, we couldn't do it. So the idea that if we just assimilate, that it will just assuage all of our sufferings is complete utopic nonsense.
And that kind of gets to the point of even like the scene right there. Because you
Yeah.
see that even when Cornbread comes back to the scene, he's like, folks, my
Right, right,
family,
right.
can I come back into the function? And they're like, what the
Hmm.
hell is wrong with you?
Hmm.
And that whole point of assimilating, right? And then trying to get everybody else to assimilate, it's
Hmm.
all under the guise
Hmm.
of blackness. But like you said before, it's the soulless kind of like destitute of who one really is, and then they try to oh yeah, it's blackness because I have to be black right now.
Mhm.
But as soon as I come in, I'm just going to take what you want, what I want from you, which is sort of like the like I'm guessing the capitalistic aspect of your conversation,
Well, sure. I
because
mean,
if I have something that you want, but I mean, if you have something I want, but
mhm.
I can't have that, but I have to then try to take that from you, like that is essentially the essence of especially our capitalist society right now.
Yeah, it's totally vampiric. It's blood sucking. I mean, it's avaricious. It's greedy. It's cupidity laden. I mean, the idea of cupidity is just doing anything for the money. And I'll get to that later on too, because I want to talk about money as a kind of representative of commodity. But even like Shedeur Sanders, as a kind of parallel cultural incident following the release of the film. I mean, you think about the fact that he went 155th in the NFL draft. Here's a guy, a young man who had over 4,000 yards thrown last season. He had over 30 touchdowns. But because he had the gaudy chains with the diamond encrusted platinum kind of jewelry on and all that kind of stuff, he was seen as unassimilable. He was seen as not assimilated into white polite culture. But Cam Ward, black too, right? But he went number one, right? But what were they saying about Cam Ward? Oh, he's respectable. He wears plain suits, right? Because it's this idea again, Soul's theodicy. You have the black rednecks, and they retained the root and tootin' culture of the unenlightened Scottish and Irish folk who immigrated in the 1700s. Uh, and you still got these niggas today, like Shedeur Sanders. He did not assimilate, and so now he's losing tens of millions of dollars because of the fact that he went in the fifth round of the draft. Here's a guy
Yeah.
who's projected to go top five. So how does that happen? It's because he didn't assimilate, because he tried to enact a kind of individuated selfhood or personhood, and he was outside of the hedge of protection of white culture, and so he was made to suffer. So what Remick says to us is that, hey, if you let me bite you, yeah, you'll become like us. Yeah, there's a death in there, but you'll become like us because he says to them, what? You already did.
Yeah.
Well, so he says that, come on, he says, you have a kind of what Leonard Harris would call a necro being, where you're in a state of perpetual death anyway. What Frank B. Wilderson, the Afro pessimist, would call social death, right? Where there's a through line from slavery up into the time of Jim Crow, up into the present day, that has never been severed, where you are at a place of perpetual death if you are black in the world. And so he says, come on in anyway, you already dead. So what do you have to lose, right? You can have fellowship with us as we subsume the known world, right? And I mean, what I like about kind of rejoinder to this though is Harry Haywood, who was a black Bolshevik, 1957. He has a pamphlet called "For a Revolutionary Position of the Negro Question," in which he says that the problem of integration, because Soul and Black Rednecks, what he says is that black people before integration, before 1954, with the Brown v. Board of Education decision, before integration and desegregation, he says economically they were doing better. And Haywood is writing, he's writing this in Soul is writing this in '05. Haywood's writing in 1957. He says that that's not true. And he talks about black farmers, for example, as we see black farmers and sharecroppers in the film, right? And he says
Yeah.
that these people were doing terribly in the 50s, terribly economically. And he says that the problem with integration is not so much that it's something that's not to be desired because of kind of race mixing or something like that. But he says the problem with integration is that you want me to be part of the capitalist pursuit and drive for world mastery. It's a powerful line in his pamphlet. And it's like, yo, that's because that's what it is. It's like, it's not just so much because, H. Rap Brown, he has a text from '69 called Die Nigger Die. He said that he didn't have a problem with, integration or anything like that. He said that he didn't care about sitting beside white people at, lunch counter. He just didn't want anybody to tell him that he couldn't go where he wanted to go, right? That's H. Rap Brown, Black Panthers, right? What Harry Haywood is saying is that um, there's freedom in integration. There's integration, has its benefits, but the problem with it is really the matter of assimilation, because I'm going to be assimilated into the imperial drive that America, because he's calling America an empire in the 50s. He says that I'm
Yeah.
going to be assimilated, the black man, into your imperial drive for world mastery. He says, why would I want to be a part of that?
Yeah, that's a
So,
huge
so,
bit of
so, so
foresight on his
right. So
behalf. Yeah.
yeah, so it's a part of what is a kind of dominating theory, right? We should have Greenland. We should make Canada the 51st state. It's a kind of imperialism, because Haywood believed in kind of internal colonialism as well, that Black people were in a kind of internal colony. The way that Stokely Carmichael believed that as well. And also Charles Penderhughes as well, is that Black people are a kind of internal colony. And so he's like, if I assimilate or if I am assimilated into you, I'm going to be a part of your mess. So you're capitalistic, you're avaricious, you're greedy, you're bloodthirsty, you're a vampire, and you're going to assimilate me. And that means that I'm going to have to be a part of the ways in which you are going to brutally violate the entire global South, the entire American South, Remick and your horde of vampires. It's all analogous. You're gonna make me a part of that, confederate with that, and that to me is the real horror in the film. Because what happens is this, is that we become inured to the fact that somehow individuality is being, I would say, advertised to us as a kind of wrongheadedness. So that if you look at Silicon Valley, which has been called Pentagon West, right? Because of how it is a kind of plutocratic corporation uh, model, where Marx writes in his critique of Hegel's philosophy of right that the corporation and the bureaucracy are really mirror images of one another. So what we see with Musk right now, he's flattening that. He is representative of the corporation. He's flattening the bureaucracy because the bureaucracy and the corporation are always vying for control of the state. And so when you look at the fact that Twitter and Instagram, all these different social media outlets are being run by these plutocrats who really infiltrate the kind of corporatistic duopoly that we call American partisan politics, you
Hmm.
can see how there's a great homogenizing project on Twitter. If you go on Twitter right now, you'll see people think because they have a certain number of likes on the tweet, that means that it represents consensus. And that's what we want so much now. We want a kind of eschatology of consensus where we're looking for a kind of end time where we're going to achieve this utopia where we'll all think the same way. We'll walk the same way, right? We'll talk the same way. We'll make love the same way, right? All of us will kind of be this kind of homogenized creature where we'll be kind of rigidified in a kind of immediate present, what Lukács would call a kind of reified self where we become part and parcel of the petty machinery of bourgeois dogma, which I think a part of that is really a kind of vampiric approach to deracinating and destroying humankind to where we become inhuman ourselves because we'll all look the same. And that's really the horror of assimilation is that we're all going to have to uh, feel compelled to have sameness. And without sameness, we won't have any kind of worth, I would say.
Let me ask you a question. So, with that soliloquy, I gained like one main idea is that American individualism either has died or it has always been a lie. And I think that individualism really is blackness as a whole, and they lied to us about that, and they want us to really not be individualistic at all. Am I hearing that correctly?
Well, there's a thing about that. And I'm glad you brought that up because the problem with American individualism, because it's really a kind of emerson, to go back to the word theodicy, soul theodicy is passive.
Right,
We're suffering because we're not in the hedge of white culture as Black people.
right.
Um, Emerson's theodicy was that it's really activistic. So I'm not waiting for anybody. Emerson believed that the only reason people suffer is because they haven't tapped into their ultimate human potential.
What's that Mrs. full name?
Ralph Waldo
Oh,
Emerson.
Bartholomew. Okay, okay.
Yeah,
I thought you were talking about him. I'm just making sure.
he was probably the first true American philosopher, coming right after the Age of Enlightenment ended in 1799, 1800. He comes into in the 1820s and 1830s, he's writing already, really forming a kind of new branch of what Cornel West calls the American invasion of European philosophy. And what he's trying to do is to show kind of American exceptionalism. This is 1830s, man. He's already on that wave. And
Yeah,
he's talking
my
about,
high school history teacher loved Ralph Waldo Emerson. Quoted him
okay,
every day almost. Him and Thoreau. You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
Like,
yeah. I mean, but see, Emerson was already on that wave of rugged individualism,
yeah,
American exceptionalism, where he even said again, you're suffering because you haven't fulfilled your potential as a human being yet. So his theodicy was I like the idea of having an activistic theodicy, a kind of liberation theodicy, but for me, it becomes too American because it's too insular, it's too self-important, it's
right,
too self-involved. But he really believed that your potential wasn't fulfilled. But what if you have the potential? What if you have a zero potential because you're in a perpetual state of non-being as a Black person? That's my critique of Emerson's theodicy, is that, yeah, there's an individualism there, which is possible. But what if my individualism is cut off from the time I'm born? Like a Michael Brown, like a Sonia Massey. What if I don't even have a chance to effloresce and become who I am because I am in a perpetual state of non-being because I'm Black in the world? Then potential is meaningless. And so it's not so much that individualism is a lie, it's the kind of overabundance in belief in this individualism that somehow or another I'm suffering. Listen to what he's saying. Because if you read his essays from the 1830s from Harvard on heroism and holiness, he has one called Holiness, he's really dealing with a kind of oversoul, what he calls an oversoul, which is this kind of transcendental understanding of the human being as always ascendant, excelsior, Stan Lee, going higher
yeah,
and higher, right?
yeah, yeah,
That's not how it works. Like, and look, there's a great book that everybody should read. It's a very good materialist book. The more I read and study, the more I become a materialist and not a transcendentalist. But there's a great text called "The Color of Law" by Richard Rothstein from 2017 that everybody who follows you should read this text. But he ends the text talking about. Um, he says that right now in America, we think that. Uh, where you are right now on the socioeconomic echelon or ladder, let's say you're working poor class, right? We think that because we're in America, we can shoot up from working poor class all the way up to, let's say, upper middle class.
right.
And Rothstein walks this whole transcendental rationalist pie in the sky view down to a materialist, realist level. And he says that ain't true, player. He says that right now he breaks it down by quintile, and he says that if you were born poor in America, you stay in that way. If your parents were born poor, you're gonna be in the same place they were. He says it's happening right now. This is since 2017 when the book comes out. And he says that that's the way that America is broken down. We think of America as a land of plenty, and it is a land of abundance. But he says that economically, he says, especially for Black people, Rothstein says, he says that if your parents were working class, you can be that way, your kids can be that way. That's how it goes. If you're middle class, that's how your kids are going to be. If your parents were middle class, you're probably middle class. And if you look at even people you know, right? I'm sure you can look and see that as being evidentiary. Certain people, if their parents were at a certain kind of level and economically, that's where they ended up achieving. If they have a college degree, oh, that's why if you look at these applications for colleges, they'll ask, oh, did your parent have a degree? Because they can predict if you're going to be able to finish your degree or not that way. Right? It's all a kind of materialist analysis. And so Rothstein's like, that's what's happening right now. And so what I've learned since I've been in Scotland, man, in the UK, is that over here they have, British Stoicism is real. They won't even admit to racism over here. They don't like to talk about it over here, right? But in America, we'll call some racist quick, quick, quick.
Very
But
true.
over here in the UK, they don't talk about racism like that, but they have a strong concept of classism. Because over here, remember, Karl Marx is buried in London, right?
Right.
So this is like a lot of the working class movements in the world came from here, right? So you have to really consider it in that way. So they have a strong class system. They've been, battling the bourgeoisie, the petite bourgeoisie since the 1600s over here. You know what I'm saying? Before there was in America, right?
Right.
So class over here is very sensitive. Like in my university, University of Edinburgh, we've gotten emails about undergrads not being snobbish towards other undergrads. Don't talk about going to Saint Tropez for spring break. Don't talk about going to the French Riviera for spring break because you're making your classmates feel less than. We've actually got emails like that. Now, this is
Wow.
the first university that I've been in. I've been, even when I was in Boston University, we never got an email like this before about classism. But here, classism is so uh, 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 readily associable and identifiable that they'll call it out quickly. But in America, we don't have a sense of classism. We don't have a sense of class consciousness in America. And it's a great problem. We see everything as when it comes to identity politics, at least, as race or gender. But we don't have a sense of true class consciousness because we think in the Emersonian way, you haven't fulfilled your potential, and that's your theodicy that you just haven't fulfilled in an activistic way, an activistic theodician way. You have not fulfilled your potential, and that's the only reason that you're suffering right now. Because you can always go up higher. When again, Ross in his book, he's like, that's not how it works, player. Not even in America, the richest nation on the planet. He says that there is a ceiling for everybody, he says, economically speaking. He says for everybody. So what I'm saying to say is that there's this dearth of class consciousness that we have. Yeah, that plays into a kind of individualist kind of reified consciousness where we don't even see ourselves in the greater milieu of class warfare. And it is warfare that's happening right now. We don't even see it. We don't even detect it. We're not able to detect it because of the fact that we really believe in our kind of limitless potential as Americans with the kind of view of American exception. This is anybody, Black people, white people, they all have this kind of consciousness or phenomenology of American exceptionalism.
Yeah, I like that's let me okay.
Yeah.
That's a lot, right? Because even because I'm just thinking about like how even in that scene there is okay, so if individualism is if Remick doesn't care about the individual, right? Because eventually you figure out that it's like a hive mind, and
Mhm.
he's the master of the hive,
Mhm.
and that like because that part for me was like a very like eye opening part because of course we see him first with the Choctaw, and they're like, hey, you guys be great.
Yeah.
God be with you. And boom, takes those two very quickly because of he can relate to their whiteness. So
Mhm.
then gets them two, and then he gets to Mary because Mary's like, hey, they gonna see me as white too, and I'm gonna try to reason with them, get this money, which again is just capitalism because they're trying to make money for the night.
Mhm.
And by the time Cornbread goes to take his piss, it's like, oh well, we got one. Let's see how many more we can get. And it's hmm, like that whole notion of this whole like idea of them sucking the literal lifeblood out of these
Mhm.
black folks
Mhm.
as a means to an end, and looking at it as like under this like even right now in America, like it's like very capitalistic, and even the fact that they're trying to suck the blood out of like just out of our like hope and like well-being. And I mean even like dude other day talking about some, yeah, like we're gonna basically shut everything out so we can bring y'all back to working in factories. Like that's what y'all need to be doing. You
Mhm.
you you gotta have 4 generations of factory workers in your family. Ain't that stability, guys? Isn't that what y'all asked for? So again, going to even the notion about what your man said about having to deal with like not being able to move up in class. Like
Mhm.
they want to really make that the thing and the standard, which is even more scary because it's so plain in your face. And I know a lot of times like we don't get like super political, but like the parallel to this movie and the parallels to what's going on right now, it's not even like, man, like I hate that the fact that, me current teacher, UX teacher, Tony also, Tony taught as well. And all of us dealing with media in some sort, because you taught English, so we got to deal with media. And the sheer fact of media illiteracy is that just at like an all-time high that you can't have coaching conversations with people to explain the obvious analogous elements of what's going on. And it can be frustrating because it's right there in front of you. Like why are you not seeing this?
Well, that's a kind of spiritualism that I think we're dealing with in America. It's spiritualism, it's a mysticism, which was a kind of rationalism. C.L.R. James, who was a great political philosopher of the 20th century, he talks about how rationalism uh, is not classless, how no philosophy is classless. I love that about his work. He has a text called State Capitalism and World Revolution from 1950. And he says that no philosophy is classless. He talks about how it's a perfect philosophy for subordination and domination and management called rationalism. And we think, Rene Descartes, 1690s and so forth and so on. That's true. But we really think of rationalism as it's a kind of personal skepticism that I can't really know when I'm saying I know, um, and I have to, cogitate and deal with objects in a kind of analytic sense and so forth and so on. And then, idealism comes out of that and starts to deal with the objective world from a kind of subjective position, following the Copernican break in philosophy and so forth and so on. So I kind of make my reality as the center of the universe and so forth and so on. And that's beautiful. Kind of transcendental aesthetic, as Kant would say. And so things that are transcendentally received, though, are not really empirically provable. And so a lot of times what happens, Rashad, at least in my estimation, certainly as I continue to deepen my scholarship in political philosophy, is the idea that we have, as an American society at large, been abstracted from the ways in which we should be shaping the democracy, that we as citizens should be shaping the legislature, the Constitution. It's not a pie in the sky thing. It's not a set it and forget it thing. That we have to be active every day. And what happens is you get these folks online, speaking, to your point about media literacy. I think a lot of it, I think some of them are sincere, but I think much of it has to do with kind of intellectual intuitionism, which is a kind of rationalism or kind of spiritualism,
Yeah.
where I don't have to deal with empirical data. I don't have to deal with materialism. I don't have to deal with Rothstein's data, for example, from the book I was talking about earlier. Forget that stuff. This is what I believe in my analytic self, my rational self. I'm very skeptical that you even exist. And I don't have to really deal with your reality. I don't have to even think about it because what did I say? My reality is king, right? It's a kind of solipsism, really. And so that's what we're dealing with. People like that, who are so taken by kind of rational thought that they have no interaction with the outside world. They have no conception of a kind of Fichtean empirical consciousness where we interact with objects that are outside of ourselves in a very sincere way um, towards enacting our will to change. Like Marx writes in the 11th thesis on Feuerbach, he says that for generations, philosophers have described the world, but now it's time to change the world. And he says that it's not enough to describe things. We have to actually get involved. And so when you think about critical theory, like Marxist philosophy, for example, which I'm a proponent of, in his critique of Hegel's philosophy of right, he says, hey man, y'all as the estates are the conscious self of the society. The state of the society is really found in the estates, in the neighborhoods, in the communities. He says that y'all are the ones that are supposed to be out here perfecting the legislature, actually making it what it is. That's an actual workers' democracy. Right now in America, we have two sides of a business faction that we call Democrats and Republicans. That's not democracy. Like even like C.L.R. James has a pamphlet called "Every Cook Can Govern" from 1956. And what he's saying in it, he deals with direct democracy in an Athenian sense. He says that even a cook can govern. That's how simple it's supposed to be. That you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be a technocrat. You don't have to be like that. But that you can be a person, a regular people, the salt of the earth, should be the ones who are actually perfecting democracy and making it true, not a kind of ratification system where they choose the people for us and we just select. That's not democracy. Democracy is you're going to form it and make it in terms of the politics, be they partisan or not, as the people, the masses of workers, really, who by their labor. Remember, Marx says that without labor, man is an animal, right? So by your labor, as you interact with the natural world to make things, right? Um,
Right.
those are the people who should be running the country, not some corporatist billionaire, some one percenter who's never even worked in the factory. Speaking of factories, can you
Yeah.
imagine him actually telling you what to do in the factory? You don't know anything about this job. You're so distantiated from it. You have no clue what we're doing here. So the real people who should be making society what it is the people who actually are working, who by their labor are manipulating the natural world and bringing to life certain commodities to perfect society. I mean, those are the folks who should be having a say in what happens. Like we had the elections here a year ago, almost a year ago, in July of
Right.
last year. It was great experiencing it because I have never seen a third party get 30% of the vote. Just going back to partisan politics.
No, that's
But
unheard
yeah,
of.
yeah, right. So in November over there with y'all, Jill Stein got 1% of the vote. 1%.
Like
Ross,
you wasting our time.
yeah, Ross Perot in 92, when he was going up against Clinton, he got 19%.
And
But
that
over
was crazy at
Yeah,
that
that's
time.
yeah, sure. Yeah. I think the most before him for a third party candidate was Teddy Roosevelt when he ran again after he left office. I think he got 27%. That's the highest I think a third party candidate has ever gotten in modern politics. And so in America, so I mean, when you deal with like going back to Jill Stein getting 1% of the vote, um, and people were upset with her, but she was saying it wasn't her fault. She was right. Like anytime you have Kamala Harris who can gain $1 billion in a week. And you think these are the good guys. Like this, do you understand how tied to corporate money you have to be to get $1 billion in a week? That's insane. And so that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a kind of corporatistic oligopolistic duopoly that we're calling partisan politics, when really we're dealing with two sides of a business class. And then we're being asked to ratify choices. Like they chose Kamala for y'all. They chose her. And
Oh,
they said, "Here,
definitely.
ratify. Choose
Like,
her. We're
and
gonna give you choices."
and in real time, it was crazy to watch. Like, so even like as we look at the movie, and you have, I'm glad you brought up the working class because I need to remind my kids in school what a proletariat is because a lot of us we just all a lot of proletariats around here, and until we recognize that, because okay, shit. So the movie, right? The people in the movie, the black folks in the movie, all the proletariats of the lowest denomination. Everybody's
Mhm.
working on their individual sharecropping land, having their own individual sharecropper currency, and the essence of them. I'm Friday night. I'm gonna say it felt like a Friday night to me, Tony. We just want to have a good time. So,
Mhm.
the point of these working class folks, and this is kind of, I think, to me, the scary part for me, and how it's kind of like realistic and like right now is that, especially for me, because I always struggle in and out of this concept of being happy and happiness.
Mm.
And for that small amount of time, these working folks just wanted to be happy with their people and have a good time.
Mhm.
And the fact that right outside, somebody was trying to literally suck the happiness out of them and then
Mhm.
replace it with something that they thought would be happiness for them.
Come on now.
And that
Come
is
on.
the assimilation.
That's assimilation theodicy. That's right. That's capitalism. That's right. It's going to tell you what you want. It's
Yeah,
going to
so
tell you
like
it's
so
going to
so
tell you what to desire.
exactly. So
Yeah.
now when it dwindles down to just like when it dwindles down to like 7, 8 people, let's say 10 tops, because we had some red shirts in there. When it dwindles down to that, we still have at least one person that says, look, I need to get out, but I'm just going to invite them in because this is the best that I have. And because my desire still outshines the group of people that I'm with,
Mhm.
even though these people actually have my back.
Mhm.
Like, and I think that's another part of the movie that they, okay, so people try to sympathize for the Asian lady. I forgot her name. And in reality, this is one of those things where we are in community with people who want to be in community with us, but when it all boils down to it, they're still gonna pick their own interest over ours. And that's why for me sometimes it's very hard being black in America because you then become so critical. You're looking at everybody, you become paranoid because you then want to make sure that your best interest is at heart. Because even though for the plot of the movie that had to happen, but it seemed we're looking at this, trying to at least analyze this a little bit. Like that part of it for me is just the breakdown of community by somebody who you're trying to be in community with and placing their happiness because she's trying to get home to her child over your actual well-being.
Mhm.
And that part for me, like you, the person who invites the capitalism in
Come on.
it's just it was a wild moment for me.
No, you set me up. No, so I mean, even like dealing with like Malcolm X, who was not a socialist by any means. He was, not a Marxist by any means, but when you read his autobiography, he critiques the black bourgeoisie. Now,
Yeah,
you said Asian, the Asian woman. Well, let's just use her as a stand-in for the kind of minority middleman, petite bourgeoisie, middle class
model
entrepreneur.
minority.
Sure. So she could be black, whatever. So, but Malcolm X's critique of the middle class, the black middle class, in his autobiography from 1965, he talks about how these folk were so pretentious. He's totally critical of them. He talks about how he just could not trust them. And so, in that same way, C.L.R. James, in his text, Notes on Dialectics, he talks about how that the middle class really emerged in 1649 in England. And he says that what happens is they emerge, and he says that, and then if you read Engels, his introduction to class struggles in France, he says something similar. He says that when they emerge, they always are in favor of capitalism. They always are in favor of what? The big bourgeoisie, the uh, whom Marx in Capital refers to as Mr. Moneybanks, Moneybags. They always defer to them because what? They want to be them.
True.
So they'll always align themselves at the cost of the proletariat to those people. And James says this happens in 1649. He says it happens in 1789, the beginning of the French Revolution. He says it happens at the outset of the 1930s in Germany. He says it happens then as well. He says that the middle class betrayed the working class and helped bring Hitler to power. And so he says that this is what has happened. This is James believe he calls it the logic of history. He says it's gonna repeat itself. It's gonna have the same features. He says for James, history and political philosophy, as well, history is a kind of political philosophy, is very predictable. He says this stuff is predictable. So even like in recent history, I don't get your podcast in trouble, but Tabitha Brown, when they were doing the Target boycott,
Yeah.
right? People were saying, "Oh, Tabitha, they were so disappointed in you, and so forth and so on. You left your products in there, and so forth and so on, because she is a part of the middle class, the petite bourgeoisie, the black petite bourgeoisie. She don't care about y'all. She's a part of a professionalistic managerial class of folk." who want to be a part of the big bourgeoisie, as Marx calls it, who want to be the capitalist class. She sees herself in that way. And so even though Malcolm X was not a socialist by any means, he critiqued them in the 60s, and the same critique that he had of them in the 60s, James had in the 40s. And James says it goes back all the way to the 17th century in England, man. He's like, yo, these people have been like that. He says these people will betray the working class every time because they will, as you just said so eloquently, let capitalism in because they want to be on that level. And these are the folk that I'm afraid of these folk. These people I have concerns for. These folk, or I should say concerns about. Um, these college educated, master's degree, professional degree blacks. Um, uh, they want comfort so bad. And I think you used the term earlier, stability. And stability has its place, man. But once we start to forsake those people who are in our own class, like I was telling you earlier about, again, the dearth of class consciousness in America, that I think is a bit different than here in the UK. But in America, there is no class consciousness, man. We think that we're all just one step away from being a millionaire, we're just one step away. Just one, we're almost there like that song from Tiana, in Princess and the Frog. And we can get into conversations about, communication because I would love to talk about that one day, just about how movies communicate certain liberal dogma. We think about liberalism as being kind of bastion of freedom and equity, but it's really not. All they care about is not being cruel, at least ostensibly, or purportedly on the surface. But in general, Marx says this clear. He says this in the German ideology. He says that they're going to give you the language of freedom. He says they're gonna give you the language. He said that they're gonna give you the language. I think he says it in the class struggles in France too. He says in 1848, 1850, this is following the French Revolution. This is the middle the mid-century revolution. And he says that these folk will give you the language of equality and liberté and fraternité. He says the whole time the big bourgeoisie, because he says the bourgeoisie is who defeated the feudal lords. Because earlier you talked about the proletariat working in the fields. Actually, I want to push back, not push back, but I want to kind of elucidate that a bit. Is that what was happening there? Those were serfs. A lot of folks talk about the Great Migration, talking about happening from 1910 to 1970, being because they were trying to escape terrorism or being lynched by the KKK. That was a part of it, but another part of it was they were trying to get out of serfdom.
Yeah, yeah.
The wheat,
Trying to
as
get
Jesus,
money.
yeah, Jesus, yeah. Jesus said the wheat and the tares gonna grow together, and that's how certain economic systems work too. In America, for example, in the American context, according to Marx's mechanical view of history, or what he calls the materialist conception of history, you're supposed to have slavery that led to feudalism, that led to capitalism, that supposed to lead to socialism and then communism, right? In America, especially when we get to the 1800s, the height of the Industrial Revolution, we had slavery, feudalism, and capitalism at the same time
Very
in
true.
America. And yeah, and so what happens is, yeah. And so what happens is when we get to 1914, which is really the end of the Industrial Revolution, beginning of World War One,
Yeah.
these folks trying to leave. But guess what's happening? There's still feudalism. That's what's really pushing them out of the South. So they leave by their millions because they're tired of being under the thumb of these aristocrats. Really, we had a kind of Southern aristocracy that was happening in sharecropping, and so again, the idea is that what you have, Marx says this clear. He says in his 1840s documents, manuscripts, he says that the bourgeoisie supplanted the feudal lords. Okay, that's how we ended feudalism in the French Revolution in 1789. Um, but he says that they helped to end that with aid from um, working with the proletariat as well, right? But he says that while they're ending it, they're doing it for themselves. So we'll end feudalism, but we want to be more powerful. It was totally egoistic. It was totally self-serving. It was totally selfish of them. It was not beneficent at all. But the proletariat thought that this was a way towards greater freedom, right? And it was, right? Certainly, right? Um, but what happens is, as they're lifting you out of freedom, they're going to give you the language of freedom and equality while they're dominating you. So when you listen to media even if you watch movies, like even kids' movies, this especially if the movie is being produced by one of these large corporations like Disney, which is one of the largest corporations in the world, start
Definitely.
listening to what these movies are telling you, man. Like listen to go back to Princess and the Frog, listen to her talk about being almost there. Almost where? Almost where, black lady?
I
Almost where?
never
Why?
watched that movie.
Yeah, but I want you to watch that. Think about that. I mean, think about, I mean, even the idea of Ariel and the Little Mermaid, trying to go out of the sea, right? It's this ambition that is American in its ethos. What you have is never enough. I have to have more, more, always ascendant, always excelsior. I have to have more because if I don't have more, I'm not content. And so it's a kind of hysteria that it means to be, I would say, a citizen in the kind of American political economy of capitalism, that kind of iteration of it, where again, we're going to be given the language of freedom and so forth and so on. But what happens is we're going to put our interests above the interests of everybody else, even though we're in the same class, we're in the same boat. That Chinese woman was in the same room with these people, and she was like, "Hey, I got to get out of here." That's deep, man. I got to get out of here
Yeah.
because where I am right now, I'm gonna forsake the well-being of everybody else for my own self-interest, and that is the love of money. That's the root of all evil that Jesus says, right, in the Bible, right? I mean, because even let's go to money now. Smoke at the beginning of the movie, he loves money. Loves money. He has to have money. What happens by the end of the movie? The clan, the Grand Dragon offers him some money for his life, and when he brings up money, just the very sound of the word money enrages Smoke, and he kills him instantly. Think about that. That
Cause,
wasn't
cause
coincidental. Like he,
cause
we're
it was never about the money. You know what I'm saying? Like like even when I saw that, like I go back to it, like it was always about the community. These people left Chicago, so go back home to do something with the people that they felt actual love and community from. And
Mhm.
like that's the aspects of it, even though it's still under the guise of capitalism, because they want to get paid doing it. They were used to a lifestyle,
Yeah.
and I mean, they came out, they were suited and booted, and the whole nine.
Mhm.
So, but you can see that, like wanting it to do to me, what I saw, and like the aspects, like I said in the first part with Sony, was like the aspect of community was the one that just jumped out to me when I saw it, and that's what they really wanted, and they wouldn't get paid doing it because money's money. But like you said, by the end of it, it wasn't really about the money. It was about doing it with the people that really meant something to them, and like and hence the Asian lady was like, "Yeah, like I'm not here. I'm working with y'all. and even Tony, you got to think about it too. What side of the street was she on working? Who was she working with?
Um.
Who was her
Oh, the white folks.
clientele in
Yeah.
the city? So,
Yeah, the polite white people. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
her husband was working exclusively and intimately
Mm-hmm.
with the black folks in the community. So
Mm-hmm.
like so there's that aspect of it too. Like
Mm-hmm.
this, like we could talk about this for the next 3 hours. Like
No. Yeah. Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
so much in it, like in the whole aspects of what you were saying about the whole, like especially the theodicy of it
Mm-hmm.
is intriguing.
Mm-hmm.
And and I haven't even seen his point anywhere. And also bringing up Shedeur Sanders into it to giving me like a very modernistic viewpoint of this period piece,
Yeah.
and this the assimilation, like that is why I like to talk to people who actually know what they're talking about and have great ideas. Even if like this, even if you don't agree with everything, I need you guys to have some great takeaways from this conversations. If you got this far in the pod, you are really the real MVP. You should have already subscribed. You should have left comments. You should have a running dialogue of comments and timestamps. And man, like yeah, Tony, we appreciate your
Yeah, man.
time
Great,
today.
man. Yeah, man. Appreciate it, man. Yeah.
Definitely. Again, sinners brought us back because aren't we all yet but sinners?
Yeah. 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 I mean, if you don't assimilate, you'll be a sinner, right? Because you're a heretic. If you're outside of that hedge protection, you are a sinner. And guess what's gonna happen to you? You're gonna suffer.
definitely.
For me,
And
when I hear the word sinners, I'm thinking of, yeah, come on in and be like us to escape that suffering, man.
yeah, that's such a great point, man. Like I've thoroughly enjoyed our
Mm.
time together. Got to get up, do this again when something, something actual culturally in media pops off again. Like this was definitely a moment. We don't have a whole lot of these moments. But this is definitely was one of those, man. Like we definitely appreciate your time, man.
I
Um,
appreciate it.
how can we reach you?
I'm on the Insta. I mean, TR Baugh,
TR Bob.
Bughh. Yeah,
Yep, you know
that's
how to
it.
get us. At the Upon Further Review on all the things. Definitely make sure you get at us. Theuponfurtherreview.com. Like this would be the place where we could actually have these conversations. So if y'all join, you know what I'm saying? Pay the 10 a month for the low 10. Again, it is capitalism, guys. I can't quit my job and do this. So if y'all do want to join, definitely come through, man. We can easily have way more lighting discussions than this. All right. But yeah, man, that's all we got, man. Until the next time.